Welcome to a new episode of our podcast series, The City as an Ecosystem. In this episode, I will discuss nostalgia. For that, I went to the city of Shanghai in China. It was October 2016. I found myself in a conference room at the Sheraton Hotel in Shanghai. Sitting there, listening to a group of relatively old Chinese professors. The subject of their conversation slowly began to make sense. These were literature professors, and they spoke of their birthplace, their village, with a romantic longing. They discussed how this specific feeling was handled in Chinese poetry. It was not an easy conversation to follow. They spoke fast, the interpreter struggled, and my jet lag kept pulling me under. I felt lost in translation. I started to wonder why I was at this table. The room was packed. Perhaps these professors were famous. As I looked closer, I saw their age and began to wonder, what had they truly experienced? Could they have witnessed the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949? Were they there with the Great Leap Forward in 1958? Or were they part of the Cultural Revolution in 1966, when schools closed and intellectuals were deemed enemies? Perhaps they had even been Red Guards, tasked with destroying the four olds. Old ideas, culture, habits and customs. Or perhaps they were the victims. No one at the Chinese university escaped their fate. I imagined their sadness, witnessing the persecution of tens of thousands seen as representatives of those four ancients. Suddenly, someone shook my arm. It was my turn. I spoke about transformation, about how creating something new always destroys something old. Creative destruction, a term from Karl Marx. I thought they would like that. I even managed to quote Confucius. I talked about my idea that when we do a transformation project somewhere, we have a duty to tell the story of the place and the things that have happened. I really have no idea what survived the translation, but they seemed to listen, and some of them nodded. And then, silence. No questions. I don't know why, out of the blue, one of the speakers mentioned Svetlana Boym. I really don't remember the context, but I immediately looked up her name on my laptop. The hotel's VPN was good. My apps worked. I learned Boym was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, and died too young of cancer in Boston, USA, where she taught Slavic languages at Harvard University. I downloaded her essay, Nostalgia and its Discontents. And just like that, everything clicked. Nostalgia! That was the concept I had been missing all the time. In that crowded room in Shanghai, the idea of nostalgia was given to me. Svetlana Boym revealed that nostalgia was invented in Switzerland by Johannes Hofer, a physician in his 1688 medical dissertation. He invented the word and made it sound Greek, nostos for coming home and algia for longing. Hofer coined it to describe homesick soldiers who couldn't fight. He believed it was a curable disease, recommending opium, leeches and a short stay in the Swiss Alps. Later, nostalgia evolved to describe all forms of homesickness. Germany's Heimweh, Portugal's Saudade. This nostalgic feeling often produces wonderful art, beautiful songs, poems, movies, novels. But it also has underexposed aspects, often unspoken by those who suffer. Nostalgia causes frustration, anger, and pain. The pain of not being able to go back. Some months later, I read Boym's book, The Future of Nostalgia. She argued that on the surface, nostalgia is a longing for a place. But deeper down, it is a longing for a time. Specifically, a time when everything felt better. And that resonated. I hear it from family who immigrated to New Zealand, finding it harder as they age. I see it in literature and among my Russian-speaking friends, displaced by their country's invasion of Ukraine, leaving family and everything behind. I see it by migrants here in Amsterdam. It's everywhere. Nostalgia. Svetlana Boym wrote, "For most migrants, nostalgia is actually a taboo. It is the predicament of Lot's wife, a fear that looking back might paralyze you forever, turning you into a pillar of salt, a pitiful monument to your own grief and the futility of departure." By now, I have come to believe much of the world suffers from nostalgia. I myself am not particularly nostalgic. My childhood was not that idyllic. Yet, I would still like to cycle through the places of my youth to see what remains, to see what changed. Boym also expressed that leeches do not help. Opium might help. There is an abundant amount of opium, but it will not solve anything. A trip to the Alps can be a very good remedy for almost everything. But then, please, let's not go all at once. I also believe that the greater and more complicated the changes around us are, and the greater our lack of control over these changes, the more widespread nostalgia will become. It is then common to look for someone or something to blame. The English had Farage with Brexit. The Brazilians had Bolsonaro. Italians have Meloni, promising to bring migrants to Albania and striving for an Italian future for Italian people. Even as 100,000 young people leave Italy annually. Orban, Milei, Trump, Putin, they all try to convince us that leeches do help. Too many people want to believe them. It is the mechanism of populists, and no one can put the genie back in the bottle. Svetlana Boym wrote, "Modern nostalgia is a mourning for the impossibility of mythical return, for the loss of an enchanted world with clear borders and values. But we all know that that is a world that never existed in reality, just like nostalgia is an invention. And that is why migration and nostalgia belong together like yin and yang, like day and night. For me, nostalgia should always be considered when we talk about migration. Opportunities are the pull, and nostalgia is the break. I stayed a few extra days in Shanghai, searching for energy, new projects, and nostalgia. I visited museums, walked the French Quarter, the Bund, and eventually found myself at the Himalaya Center of Arts. It was a huge building at the end of a metro line. I finally found the entrance. Inside, photos and videos filled the space. And the subject of that exhibition? It could only have been one thing: nostalgia. There were large format photos on display, depicting the villages as they were and as they are right now. Yes, when you see it like that, there is plenty to mourn. Although these photographs, they looked incredibly beautiful. On one wall, translated into English, I read this, and I took a picture.
The countryside in China has been increasingly dilapidated and will eventually disappear in the overwhelming social reform. What's worse, the civilization and the value ideology of Chinese nation established over thousands of years have totally collapsed. As the villagers leave their homeland, the village loses its divinity. Once the ethic value system formed during the past 1,000 years is disintegrated, the spiritual core in the village will go with the wind. The divinity of the countryside has been left far behind under the domination of rationalism and science, and then melted into air with the rise of Mammonism. We have done great harm to the country, including country spirit and belief, family honor and dignity, family ethics and order, and villagers' morality and behavior. These are all important parts of Chinese value system, national spirit and country's core value and belief. Nowadays, our national roots have been cut off. Family inheritance does not exist anymore. The value system disappears. Our spirit is so lonely and has nowhere to go. We have lost our divinity just like an orphan who gets nothing to rely on. Without its precious soul, the country is like an old man who walks into dusk.
The podcast series The City as an Ecosystem is an initiative of Carolien de Jager, Hogeschool Rotterdam, and Evert Verhagen, Creative Cities Amsterdam. You can find all episodes on Spotify and on the creativecities.nl website. There you will also find any background materials in a PDF file with the same title.
The music for this podcast episode is by Janghua. The song is titled Chinese Lacquer and comes from FMA, the Free Music Archive, with a CC by NC license. The voice reading the Chinese text is Constance Lee, and she is with Speech Playground on Microsoft Azure.